Welcome to Woodcraft, another Saturday demo here. I'm Mark, and we'll be talking about half-blind dovetails and using them to make a drawer. Half-blind dovetails, what are they? Half-blind dovetails means that you can see the dovetail from the side, but not from the front. This is really great when you don't want to have a false drawer front on your drawers. You can certainly do drawers with full-blind or with full through dovetails and either do a veneer on the front or a false drawer front on there. I suppose you could add a false drawer front to this as well, but very strong dovetail joint. Looks really nice from the side there. The dovetail jigs, a few weeks ago, I did one on the Leigh through dovetail jig. That is this guy here. Again, you can certainly make a box out of this with this, drawer boxes, standard boxes. I have done drawer boxes with full through dovetails and then false fronts on them. So you can certainly do that if this is what you have. You don't necessarily have to get a fancy jig for it. This other one here is the Wood River dovetail jig, and this has the template for the single pass half blinds. Porter Cable has one pretty much like this as well. The single pass half blinds mean that you take both pieces and they both mount on there at the same time, like thus. One piece is offset from the other, and you one bit, one setup, one pass, and you have a corner. I have today the Leigh D4R jig, which is set up, mine is set up for 2-pass half blinds. The newer D4R Pro is set up for single pass half blinds. There is also a upgrade kit for the D4R in order to do the single pass half blinds, and the fingers have a hole through them to have a backstop, which is already built into these single pass half blind jigs. I have brought the Leigh D4R. This is the older version of the jig. Once we get over to this, I'll take it apart so you can see what we're doing. This is actually set up for a 2-pass. So you're going to cut the tails, and then you're going to set it up and cut the pins. Takes a little more time, but does the same thing in the long run. The newer version of this, the D4R Pro, is set up to do single pass half blinds. You can get an upgrade kit if you do have this older version. It changes the fingers out so that there is a hole through them to put a stop bar on there in order to do single pass half blinds. We're going to do the 2-pass, works just as well as what I did here. Okay, so you'll need your jig. You're going to want lots of scrap wood. You still see me in there? Perfect. You're going to need lots of scrap wood. It should be exact dimensions for what you are going to be making your box or drawer boxes out of. I had lots, and I'm going to kind of go over what happened and what I figured out doing this. I have cut through dovetails by hand. I've used a couple different jigs. This is the first time that I've done half blinds. It took a little bit of time to figure out, but some of that time was some issues I was having with equipment, and we'll get into that. You will also need a router. I have my Bosch router here. This has a 1/2-inch collet, and I know you can't see it, but in there is an 1/2-inch to 8mm collet reducer, which was some of the issues that I was having. Again, we'll get into that here shortly. And then a 7/16 outside diameter guide bushing. Now this is just a standard guide bushing. This is not the Leigh elliptical E-bush, they call it. It is not that. It's just a standard 7/16 diameter. And then this is a 1/2-inch, grab my book here, hold on a sec. This one is a 1/2-inch, 14-degree, so it's a 1/2-inch diameter, 14-degree angle on there, with well, working depth is about 7/16. For what I did, I made these drawer boxes out of 3/4 inch thick material. You can certainly go thinner on there. That's going to kind of depend on how thick your material is. It's going to depend upon the bit you use. At 3/4 of an inch thick on your material, you want to have at least 1/8 of an inch left here. If it's thinner than that, you'll have to get the appropriate bit. So for 3/4 inch, this cut length was just right. It did leave extra material here, but it works just fine. Okay, so we have that. Now, the Bosch router, the plunge base actually has the setup for the Porter cable style bushings. And for this, I wanted to use a fixed base. The adjustments are a little more precise on it without having that plunging action, and I didn't want to accidentally release the plunge and run this bit into the bushing. So you don't want to do that at all, running or not. So I have the fixed base router here. This is actually a Jasper bushing adapter plate that I have on the bottom here. This bushing and this plate need to be perfectly on center. So to get that on center, I grabbed standard 1/4 inch inside diameter bushing, a centering pin, which I got from one of my other Jasper jigs, and then the 1/4 inch collet. And so I started by putting this 1/4 inch collet on there, mounting the 1/4 inch inside diameter bushing to the plate, and then the centering pin. And I don't get wrenches up for that. I just hand tighten it on there, and then rotated this base around until I got some screw holes lined up. Tighten down the screws, and at that point you can take all this stuff off, and then put the 1/2 inch collet, the 1/2 to 8 millimeter collet reducer on there. Put the base on, drop the bit in there, tighten it up. Little difficult because you have to tighten it up with everything on there because, of course, the bit is not going to fit through the bushing. So that is set up there, ready to go. I know there's a lot there. If you have issues and need help, watch the video again when it gets put up on YouTube. Come in and see me, and I'd be happy to help you there. So there we got that going. All right, so I did a lot of test pieces. Actually, all my test pieces were poplar, and I was running out of poplar. So I found I had some scrap mahogany sitting in my shop, so I grabbed some of that. It just happened to have been pre-finished and milled down to 3/4 of an inch, so it really worked out for me. This is something it takes a little while to set up. I highly recommend getting your book. Although the setup on here is going to be very similar to any other half-blind, always refer to your manual as far as it goes. And Leigh, yeah, this is a big manual, but I found that it was actually pretty darn easy to follow. It was written as if somebody was talking to you, not a lot of technical jargon or anything like that. Just very, very easy to follow. And so I went through bit selection. That's why I chose the bit I chose for the thickness of material that I have. And then step by step as far as setting this up. Okay. Joel, if you want to come around here, and we'll talk about this jig. And then that'll kind of lead me into some of the issues that I was having, which I had them, so maybe you guys won't that are out there. Are there any questions so far? No? We're still doing good? Perfect. All right, so on here, when you set up the lead jig for half blind, you want your template here to show half blind tails in the bottom right. So we know even though this stuff is all here, this is what we're looking at. It's visible in the direction that we should see. Okay. Now, this scale should be set for the thickness of material that you're using, and it may be difficult to see, but I'll slide this back a little bit here. This line right here is your indicator line. There's one on each side. We're using 3/4 inch thick material. So we're going to slide this up to 3/4 and lock it into place on both sides. So we got that. And then over here on the left, whenever you're working on the Leigh jig or pretty much any jig, you typically work from the left to the right. These are the fingers. They are split fingers on here. This is the pin side with the rounded ends. And I pretty much just crammed, this is standard spacing, nothing special. And I went ahead with all my setup work and preliminary on here and got them set up. And they should be set for 5.5 inch wide pieces at 3/4 of an inch thick. All right. This piece back here is a sacrificial piece. I'm going to be moving it as we work here, but for this, it sits up here. It's just a backer board. And then, of course, clamps and all that. So my problems that I had before I start, just so that you know what's going on, when I was cutting, I was very close. In fact, I think this was, I don't know if can you see that there? This was one of my first ones that I did. They're a little deep, but they fit pretty decently. And then when I went to cut more, they changed. And I would set it again, and I would cut more, and it would be okay, and then I would cut again, and it would change. Well, it turns out that the collet reducer that I had in my router came loose or was moving. So it wasn't actually, even though I tightened the heck out of that thing, it moved. And so that was a big portion of the issues that I was having. So if you cut and then your next cut, things have changed, that's one of the first things to look at. And so it happened to be that I had another 1/2 to 8 inch or 8 millimeter collet reducer, so I changed that out, and that helped a lot. My second problem was actually in the router base. When I was adjusting for tightness of fit, you have to change the height of the bit protruding out of the router, and I would unlock the router and the whole thing would move. It should stay put. You should be able to unlock it, stays put, make your adjustment, lock it back down, but it would move. So I switched bases out to my other fixed base that I had, and that helped a ton. But I found at some point that I had bottomed out on my adjustment and had to loosen the bit, pull it out a little bit more, tighten it back up, readjust the whole base, and practically start over. So again, I went through a lot of poplar trying to figure that out. And you can see on here I have it written, no, this was a side that didn't work, so I cut the other side. When I got through those and they weren't working, I would go to the table saw, cut it off, and start over again. And you have to cut off, start over. Whenever you do this half blinds, you have to start with fresh ends. You also want to make sure that your stock is perfectly square, flat, or square and flat. Things seem to be cutting square, but then I noticed my miter gauge was moving, and so I'd cut, and I'd have a little extra gap here and no gap down here, and it wasn't cutting perfectly square because my miter gauge was moving. I fixed that, and I was able to cut square after that. So good and square. Make sure your collet is in there, your collet adapter isn't slipping on you, you have a lot of adjustment in your base, and you should be good to go. All right, get that out of the way here. So to set this up, you need to select, of course, your material, the correct bit. Much like the through dovetail jig that we used before, setting the bit height, it was similar to that. This bit that I have in here, this is the number 120 from Leigh jigs. Its nominal working length is 7/16 of an inch. So I took my stock and then I marked a 7/16 inch line on there. I know it's really difficult to see on the mahogany here, but 7/16 inch. Then I put this up into my jig, And so on this one, what we want to do is bring the backer board forward and against the left-hand stops. And then my template is actually sitting up high right now. So I'm going to drop that down so it sits flat on my backer board. And then I can bring my material all the way up, and it needs to be all the way again to the left and up against the bottom of the template. And then clamp that down. Okay. And then from here, you can set your router on, and you'll notice it is not plugged in yet. I don't want this thing inadvertently turning on. And I'll set it on here, and I know you can't see from there, but underneath, I'll set the depth of the cutter to that line. That's a good starting point. Doesn't mean it's going to be right. You're going to end up moving it up or down from there. I have it set, hopefully, for this wood already, so I don't need to make any adjustments, but we will discuss adjustments here shortly. So that should be good there. When routing for the tails, which is what we're going to do, the first thing you want to do, because we're in this side grain here, to help prevent tear out, we're going to do a climb cut. And a climb cut is moving in the same direction that the cutter is turning. So you really got to hold on to this, hold on to the router, because it's going to want to pull that way. Okay, but you're less likely to have tear out. And then we're going to start on the right-hand side after we do that climb cut just across the front. Doesn't have to be very deep, just right across there. Then we're going to come in the right-hand side and start out in the back. Because this is kind of wide, I'm going to do a couple passes until I get to the finger here, and then I'll come forward and I'll come into the right. And so you can do this a couple ways. You can go all the way in and just keep going around from right to left in a climb cut. And when you get to the last one, you're going to start up against the finger and go through and then clean up the rest of it. And then you'll probably want to come back, you want to come back and route again just to make sure that you got that bushing all the way up to the fingers here. I did this a lot over the past couple days, so I'll come in, I'll clean it up, I'll go around. Once I go all the way through, I'll come back out and go backwards to clean that up, and then I'll go back in and come around this way. And then I'll just do kind of a double pass on everything as I go through there. So, get that out of the way here. And I happen to have part of a box already done. I'm not going to show you the routing for or cutting dados or anything like that. I have already done it. These pieces are exactly the same size as my demo box over here. So hopefully when I'm done, this thing will all fit together right. It's just a matter of marking everything where you're going to cut. So this is the top of the box here. You can see my dado here for my drawer bottom. This is the front. There's my drawer bottom there. So I'm going to set that all together there. We want pins on the front. So I'm going to turn this around and I'm going to mark this pins, pins. Okay? When you cut these, the material needs to be facing inside out. So I know I want to cut pins here and I want to cut pins here. That side's going to be facing up. These other ones, again, from the inside, we're going to cut tails here and we're going to cut tails here. All right, so pin board to the side for the moment. The back gets nothing but the dado for the bottom, so we'll set that aside. And so we're going to be doing tails and tails. And they are, again, marked on the inside of the box where I'm going to be cutting them. Okay? So tails, tails. Check again because I goofed this up the other day. Into the jig. Lock it down. That's locked down. All the way against the stop there. And then this is the router and vacuum, router support and vacuum attachment. Unfortunately, I don't have a vacuum in here that will hook up to this, I'm just using it for some stability so I don't drop the router off the front. There may be an adjustment on here, but this surface is actually slightly lower than the fingers here. So I'm going to try and hold all my weight on the fingers. All right, so we should be set up now to cut these tails. And as always, I'm going to put on some safety glasses and some earmuffs, and we're going to make a big mess. How are we doing on questions? Any? Nope? All right. All right, so remember first, I'm going to do a climb cut across the front edge just to score it, and then I'm going to start on the right and cut all the way through. I'm going to cut that one, then we're going to immediately go ahead and cut the other side, and then we'll set up for the pins. So here we go. And before I reach in there, one last thing, I want to double check, make sure that this collet is nice and snug. They vibrate loose. All right, plug them back in. And here we go. And I'm going to make sure it comes to a complete stop before I pick it up, just because that bit is poking out the end there. And also make sure that I've gone all the way back. I had a little bit of blowout. I'm not going to worry about that for this demo here. If you have that, get a clean piece of your backer board. All right, so we have tails. And you'll see that this dado actually goes through here. Because it's half blind, that's going to be covered up, so that is perfectly fine. Not a problem there. And then we're going to cut the other tails. Everything should be exactly the same. Wait till that stops. Get it all the way through on everything. And then we'll pop this guy out. And we have the other tails on that side. All right. So now the pins. Take that out of the way. Go ahead and raise this up a little bit so it's easier to work. We're going to pull the backer board out here, and it's going to come up from the bottom. Come on now. There we go. And I'm going to just arbitrarily put it up in there, clamp it down. And then we're going to take the pins, which from the inside of the box here, it's going to come in to the left. We're going to set it there a second. And now we're going to flip our template over. Now, again, if you were running test pieces, you would set this for the thickness of that material, which is 3/4 of an inch. But I know from my testing that that's going to be not quite deep enough. So what I'm going to do is just move the template back so the 3/4 inch mark is just behind the jig mark here. And hopefully that'll get us back where we want. This, when you cut your pins, this is where you adjust how far out the pins are extruding from the tails. Okay. The tails on this one are a little deep, You don't typically want more than maybe a 32nd of an inch or a 64th at most, or a 64th to a 32nd of an inch, just for some cleanup. But if they're too deep, don't want to do that. So hopefully when we do this, get this done, we're going to be about this. So it's just a real light sanding will clean that up. All right, so we're in. Another quick tip. In order to get this template flat and level, we're going to take one of our other pieces and just stick it in here real quick, and then we can drop the template down. Now it's flat and level. Then we'll take that piece out. And then this front piece, we want to drop down. It's really there as a stop for how far forward your pin stock is going to be coming. So we just want it to barely come up. We don't really want to run into it with the router, although it's not going to hurt anything if we do. So just double checking here, just behind the line. Just behind the line. Clamp that down. Bring the router support back. And we should be good to go. Now the beauty of the half-blind dovetail is that you have one bit and one setup. So we don't have to do anything else. Now when you route here, we're going to start on the left, and we're going to go into the left and out to the right. Well, kind of take that back. You don't want to do this first one or this very last one, just what's in between. And we're going to do this kind of half moon shape. So in left to the right. So we're going to go in, and it's all by feel and sound. Going to go in, go across, then they go back to the left, go in a little bit, go across, come out, go back to the left. Doing about 4 to 5 passes or so. You're just taking a little bit at a time because we're cutting into end grain. Okay, so we're going to get up on here. Make sure the bit's not touching anything, and we're going to go for it. Come to a stop. And that should be that side. All we have to do is pull it out of here, flip it around, and put it back in against the left-hand stop again. And we should be set for the pins on the other side. So that should be good. Just a little bit of tear out here. I'm not too worried about that. Normally I would do the dovetails first and then come back and do all the dados, but for the sake of this, I wanted to get them done and ready to go so we can assemble a box. All right. So got all that. Joel, if you want to come back around the front here, we'll see if we can assemble this box. With any luck, everything will fit. And then we'll kind of talk about some adjustments if necessary. So, like this. There's that side. Like that. There we go. That's more or less how I meant to do it. And then we can do the other side on there, like this. Nope, that's right. All right, so this is some really old mahogany, and it's kind of splitting out a little, got a little tear out here and there, but that's all right. More or less have a box. A little out of square, but that's okay. So, a couple of adjustments here. If these were too snug going in, that is an adjustment in the router bit height, how far this bit is protruding out. And I have my book here. Okay, so if the pins are too loose, if the pins are too loose, you're going to actually lower or extend out the bit further. And if they are too tight, you're going to retract it in a little bit. And that's by the gap. If they're too loose, you're going to have a gap there, so you're going to actually adjust it out, that dimension of that gap. And then vice versa, go in the other direction if they are too tight and won't go together. So that adjustment is done after you get, well, you do that first. Once you get that fit tight, then you're going to adjust for actual depth of cut. And this is like absolutely perfect. This would just take a tiny bit of sanding to clean that up there. And if the wood wasn't falling apart, it would look a little better, kind of like this guy here, although I did have a little bit of blowout on that guy. But that's where you would be. Those are two almost identical drawer boxes with half-blind dovetails. Again, if you had a single-pass half-blind setup, it'd be much quicker. 2 passes with the router, and you are set to go. Do we have any questions at all? We do not. I thank you for your time. If you have questions about this, trouble setting up your jig, please come and see me. I'm here a few days a week at Woodcraft Spokane. Thanks.